And then we will just get just to the good information, the rich information that you all be sharing and making a contribution with. And so welcome, good evening. I am excited to be present tonight to facilitate a discussion with several African-American men who hail from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we are talking about an issue that is really important and affects us all, quite frankly, and it's vaccination amongst vulnerable populations. And we actually have a different title if someone wants to say what we came up with. Bashir, if you want to just say what we thought we would call our time together.
We were looking at interrupting regrets.
Yes. And it's just fascinating. I think that what Antonio Gramsci said, and he was a European philosopher who basically said that we have organic intellectuals. And so what he meant by that is that just doing life causes many of us to become experts at our stories. And so these gentlemen that are here together are experts at the story of their lives and certainly have some education to be transferring to the listeners and the hearers of this broadcast. And so my hope is that this unguarded time where we can be honest and transparent will actually provide content that is difficult to find anyplace else. And so Dr. Easter and I have had a number of conversations just in prepping for this. And then we have a series of questions that we have pulled together. But as dialogue goes, we might not get to all of them because there may be some follow-up questions that really expand on a concept and make it more rich. And so I'm really looking forward to this. And so thank you all again for saying yes. And so what we'll start with is really introductions. And so hope to just have you share who you are, perhaps, where you're located and what you do by profession or how you feed your family. And then we'll go from there. And so, Lynn, I think that you are first. You're first on my screen. I think I see you on my screen. So would you mind just introducing yourself? And thank you again for being here.
All right. No, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. No, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate being here with all of you. So my name is Len Davis, actually born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, currently living in McAllen, Texas, so South Texas. My career has brought me to the Texas area. I am an operations executive with an aviation company. Was an essential worker throughout the pandemic. And so obviously have some experience and thoughts to share in that regard, but that's who I am in a nutshell.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that and welcome again. Dr. Easter, you're next on my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. My name is Dr. Bashir Easter, and I'm the founder of Melanin Minded LLC. Our focus is to be able to be the bridge for information services support for people of color. And I'm also the associate director of the All of Us research program that is in the 9th state being of Wisconsin. I had COVID before the vaccination was actually available. So I have a very strong opinion about how it actually impacted me, having some of the issues that were listed as what exacerbated the issue as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that sharing. And next on my screen, Devario, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Of course. Good evening, and thank you for having me as well. Devario Rains, also like Leonard, born, raised Milwaukee, Wisconsin, currently out in sunny Surprise, Arizona. So I've been out here for about 5 years now. I own a small company called Rainsway LLC, where we deal with property preservation. More recently, separated from the automotive retail industry, where I spent close to 20 years. And we were deemed essential as well during the pandemic. So a lot of experience and a lot of firsthand experience, good and bad, dealing during that time.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Next on my screen is Jarrett Fields. Jarrett, would you introduce yourself, please?
Perfect. Thank you so much for this call and having me on. I'm Jarrett Fields, first of my name. I am the Ed Equity Director for a nonprofit called the Social Justice Learning Institute. Born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. a COVID survivor, as well as someone who worked in both education equity and health equity for the Social Justice Learning Institute.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you for that sharing. I sure appreciate that. And then William David is last on my screen.
Thank you. My name is Mr. William Davis. I am a school leader, or we call them principals in Milwaukee. I am a school leader at, sorry, I just ran up the stairs, for KIPP. So my school is called KIPP Spirit. We're located in Sunnyside, Houston. We're Houston, Texas. I've been in education for approximately, Lord Jesus, 20 years. Dang, that's a long time. 20 years, and have served in many different capacities. But leadership has definitely found its way in my life, where I'm not only just changing lives for our kids, but also for adults as well. So continuing to do that work.
Excellent, fabulous. Welcome and thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you all for all that you do and the contributions you make. And so a couple of people indicated that they originally were from Milwaukee and are living somewhere else. And I want to highlight the reality of networks that are supportive. This particular group I was made aware of through another person, and I was fascinated by the story of support that it offered in terms of men coming together and developing relationship to the place where they were able to have very difficult questions with one another. And so by extension, these folks are Milwaukee bred, and they are continuing to support efforts in Wisconsin by their relationship with the other men that are still living here in Wisconsin. And I just want to make sure that that is clear for our listeners. And so I'm going to jump right into our questions, and later on I may share my screen and show you all some statistics if we have some time for that, but I do believe the conversation will be so rich we may not get to that. And so I want to start with the very first question, which is, how did you experience the invitation for vaccination, and what factors contributed to your decision to either vaccinate or not? And I'm not asking you to disclose your status, but just want to know what decisions laid bare in your what information made a contribution to your decision. And so, Bashir, Dr. Easter, you're popping up on the top of the screen now. So would you mind leading us off?
Yes, I thank you for that. I bring that up because I made the discussion, or that I actually had COVID. So I caught COVID early. And when I started with the symptoms, I have diabetes. So that was listed on the list of those items that would cause to be a high risk. Having that, I was 30 days into the infection, and it impacted me to the point that I had spotted pneumonia once I finished out with it. There was no vaccination at that time. I was in fear. I was very afraid. When I say 30 days, it was severe fatigue, no appetite. I lost 30 pounds, and I was isolated from family because of what was going on. And it was in the height of what was happening, where people didn't know what to do. There was no contact with family or friends. And at the point, I was in fear. And so when we got to the point of hearing of a vaccination, or any type of vaccine rather, I actually had to ask my doctor, because there was so much misinformation that was going out there, was that since I started to recover, did I actually need a vaccination? And he stated to me very clear. He said, with the variants that were going on, you could get it as if you never had it before. So that fear of that experience that I had, I made sure that I was in line to get the vaccination, because I felt firsthand what it actually could do to your body.
Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share, want to chime in on that question?
I can chime in.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer is no. It's not a really drawn out answer. I think for me, two reasons. And I remember when it first came out, like, for my mindset is, I'm a leader of a school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have approximately 600 kids in my school.
Mm-hmm.
And I manage approximately 60 teachers in my school. I am no good to them if I can't be there. So if I'm trying to do the work in a community known as Sunnyside, which is one of the worst in Houston and one of the worst in the nation, if I'm really trying to change the narrative around what people feel about Black students, or Black boys and girls, Black and brown boys and girls, I needed to make sure that I needed to stay healthy within that building. Now, again, navigating through, I still may get it, right? But I may not get it as, bad as others. But more importantly, I also got 2 daughters who depend on me every single day, and a wife who depends on me every single day. And I remember when I first got it, I was like, oh my Lord, what is this? The first day I was like, oh, I'm good, and then the brothers on here know that we play basketball. I was like, oh, this is cold, man. We good. I'm all right. Day 2, I was like, oh, no, Lord, what you doing? And then day 3, I'm like, Lord Jesus, take the wheel. Like, just take the wheel from me. And, that was not a good feeling. I remember having a conversation with my brother. I want to say maybe like day 5. And the conversation was just built around like just being nervous and scared. Around like, if I left this earth today, is my family ready to have conversations about them losing her husband, because I was at the actually was what pushed me to be.
Will, you're going in and out of mute. I'm not sure if you're touching anything.
No, this is probably this computer. Just a long story. Just wanted to make sure my family had me there. Yeah. And so that's kind of what pushed me to get vaccinated.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sharon. And you all have touched in your answers on several different questions, but if someone else wants to answer, I do want to connect to some of those other questions real quickly. So was someone hoping to respond?
I would just follow up really briefly on Will's point, and that was the way that I made the decision came both out of family concerns and school and work, right? So I'm in and out of schools, and the reality was, for me, I was vaccinated after I'd acquired the Omicron variant, right? So I had gotten that far into the pandemic and the spread, right? Not to have that first variation or the second Delta, but the third Omicron. And a lot of it came down to talking with my family. I have asthma, right? So there were a number of concerns. My hesitancy was really all the misinformation about, right, how the variant could affect, or how the vaccination could affect people. And I will say one thing that hopefully might lead into another question is, I have a Black primary care doctor. And hearing from that Black doctor gave me some sense of security in terms of not feeling so distant from the medical field and what information was out there. As an organization, one of our board members is vaccine doctor at UCLA. And so it helped a lot because he was able to talk to us about the different types of vaccinations, what exactly is happening between the vaccinations and how it affected your body.
Wow, thank you for that. Before I run on, because those answers were so great, did anyone else want to answer that? Because I can go on.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll say, for me, getting the vaccine for myself was more out of fear. I was in automotive retail, and the dealership that I managed, it was as if COVID did not exist. And this was in the initial states of it. So again, we had to be there open to close, and we have people coming in that are not even protecting themselves at the bare minimum. And again, just being honest, just the vaccine was not something that was at the forefront of my thought at that point. Again, still dealing with the information, processing it, and just the general safety factors. But again, just seeing the people coming in and out, the, again, lack of social distancing, all of this. And again, this is within the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. So I was fearful. So again, that prompted me to have the conversation more so than any other factor.
Wow, that's great. Well, Lynn, I don't want to leave you out. Would you mind answering that also?
Yeah, I would say fear was a factor for me. I too, like many of the folks on the call, have some underlying conditions that raise some concern, but also I mentioned being an essential worker throughout, but also in a leadership position at the company I work for. So I had to disseminate information to the workforce, but I was also able to see firsthand how people were responding to it. And so in seeing that variation, that raised more concern in my mind. So I didn't want to take the risk of not being vaccinated versus that potential outcome. And so one other thing to give you some insight on, I worked the first part of my career, more than 12 years, in the medical device industry, and actually had a chance to work with clinical research teams as part of my early career experience. So I was familiar kind of with the clinical trial process. I'm not saying I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I was familiar with the process. I understand that this is kind of what happens. So overall, I was a little more comfortable with knowing that there's a process behind determining if this is safe and effective, although it may be expedited. I was willing to weigh kind of those different options and made that decision for myself. So.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And so you touched on the misinformation and you gave some answers to how you managed it. I may come back to that, but more than that, the thread that came rushing out at me was this whole idea of who you were accountable to and for. And so I want to have you all just expand a little bit on that piece about how you felt like you were accountable to other people, and that motivated you even more than the fear and that kind of thing. And so what did the responsibility and accountability you had, how did that motivate you? And so just want to extend that a little bit.
I'll jump in. Just, I think, to parallel some of what Will was saying. And that is that as a father and a husband, my inability to take care of myself means that my family has a whole lot more to do, right? And so I have 2 young daughters, and the awareness that I have in terms of if I'm bedridden, if I can't get up and normally do the things that I do and take care of and help with hair and breakfast, like all these different things, the reality is my sickness or my inability to execute those duties means a whole lot more for a household that is already pretty hectic, a household that already is on a tight schedule. And so I think that's the sort of material effect. The emotional effect is me feeling like I would be letting them down, right?
Okay.
That at the end of the day, my manhood and my fatherhood is attached to an emotional awareness of that role and what that means to sort of quote unquote let people down who are depending on me on a daily basis.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, and then I think you hit on just the mental strength and the providing aspect. And also there was a physical aspect of it as well, meaning, you know, when we were in the pandemic, Dad was the one that was going out. You know, if Dad we need something from the store, Dad's going to the store. If we need any errands, Dad is going to put himself in that place of harm as well to take on that for the house, so that, you know, no children are getting sick. My wife's not getting sick, you know. So to Jared's point, you know, when you think about all those things, another factor in pushing to get the vaccine, like he said, was to make sure that I'm protected so that I can do my best to shield everyone from whatever is waiting outside of these doors.
Wow. Now, I've heard a number of stories about the efforts that the people in the home that were leaving and coming back took when they got to the house. Did you all have any steps, some processes, or any procedures for when you re-entered the home? What are some of the things that you all did to protect the family that was there at the house?
Can I jump in, please? I'm laughing because my wife. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm just cracking up. So we had and we still do it. Like we it's funny, it's like we talking about Lysol, bottles of Lysol, bottles of wipes, like take your shoes off, don't go nowhere until you go straight to the restroom type of stuff. And it was it was honestly like our saving grace. Like we had, and my wife is, I mean, they know my wife. She is a very particular person. Like when you get in the house, I'm gonna spray you. And when after I spray, you're going to the restroom. You're gonna take your shower. We're gonna put your clothes inside out. We're gonna do all of that. And it wasn't able to do anything. Spray the cars when we get out the cars. Wipe down our cars. We got out our cars. And just really had that mindset for almost at least a year. And we still kind of do some of that stuff. It's weighing a little bit. But it was honestly, now I think about it, was really like some of our saving grace. Like thank God, like my first girl to me has yet to catch COVID. Yet to catch it. And Tamika just caught it maybe about like a month ago, and Tamira has caught it maybe like about a month ago as well. No, 2 months ago, I'm sorry. But some of those strange things that we call strange, I think we laughed at some of the social medias with parents spraying their child with Lysol. So that's some of the things that we still implemented. And even when I went to work, like, wiping down my desk every day, spraying my office every day, spraying down like just certain areas. And I think just those little things really just, we look at them as strange and we could probably laugh at them later. But it was really some of our saving graces for my household, at least.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Others?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I would say we didn't, from a household perspective, we didn't go to any extremes. However, we did make sure that common surfaces were cleaned frequently. My significant other and the kids were all at home. I was the only one leaving the house, going to work. Our controls at work were significant in terms of temperature checks upon entry, evaluation of symptoms, social distancing. We didn't do a ton in person. Now it's an operations environment, so you would have to interact with people, but face masks and things of that nature were all in play, and we took that very serious. So although I was essential and working, I had some level of comfort that we were trying to do the best we could. And so that gave me some comfort when I went home. Now with that, within the household, if anyone experienced symptoms or anything of that nature, then, hey, nope, child, you have to stay in your room. Upstairs will, depending on, the outcome of testing and things of that nature. So we took that very seriously. Over time, a couple of the kids did eventually catch it, but I'd say nothing extreme. However, again, the workplace was very controlled, and from a cleanliness perspective at home, we definitely tried to stay up with things. So it's a little insight just from my environment. So
yeah, thank you for that. And we know that the vaccination did not prohibit folks from catching the virus. It simply made the issues related to it less severe. And so the hope was that it staved off hospital stay and some of the things that were more deadly. And so, so I appreciate you all really talking the lived experience of your vaccination experience. So thank you for that. So now, one of the questions had to do with the misinformation that floated around, and you all spoke to that. But I really want to have you all talk about who forced the conversation about vaccination. And it kind of, you have kind of peaked a little bit here and there, but it seemed like somebody in your life kind of said, we need to talk about this. And William, you talked about, asking the question of the family, are they ready to be without you? I think it was you, Will. And so I want to know who for you all forced the question about vaccination and brought it to brought the elephant square into the room.
For me, my family is in different parts of the country, and every Tuesday we have a family Zoom. Mm-hmm. And we try to make that family Zoom almost like church, right? You need to be there. And so on those calls, every generation is represented, and that was where the push for discussing the vaccine came from. For my grandmother, she had concerns about the effects of the vaccination for folks over 70, right? My parents, who are diabetic, had concerns about diabetes. And so a lot of it came on those calls, which vaccination, right? By the time that there were 3, right? So
Right.
which vaccination should we get? What have we been reading? So it was those conversations and a lot of Google research. But I think what tipped our decision for those that did get vaccinated, I should say not everyone in my family got vaccinated, but for those who did not, it was a health decision. It wasn't one that was just sort of like, hey, I don't want to. They had legitimate concerns about the effects of the vaccinations on them. But what I think tipped the scale was, again, I mentioned one of our board members for the organization is a doctor at UCLA. And once he began to sort of do more presentations, I took a little bit of the information that he gave and then exposed my family to it. And that was the sort of tipping point. And then the vaccination in particular was really which one was most accessible in their area.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I
Sure.
would
Now,
say, oh, go ahead.
go ahead. So I was going to say, thank you, Dr. Bashir. I was going to say, for me, it was, it's funny. It came from the 2 ends of my family. So my grandmother at this point is like the oldest individual in our family. And my grandmother raised me. So she forced the conversation, so to speak, as I'm not going to be able to see you. I'm not going to be able to come down there. My safety is going to be in jeopardy. And, in her generation, they're a little more trusting of the information without seeking the source out. And then my daughter, being the youngest,
Mhm.
she doesn't really have the experiences to draw upon that we do, or the information or the history about the negative effects of some, science tests or medical tests or things like that. So again, she's more trusting as to why aren't we protecting ourselves? So
Mhm.
for me, being in the middle of both of those generations, that was the conversation pusher for myself. Again, my grandmother more from a, you're not protecting me and you're not protecting this generation standpoint. And then my daughter from the understanding of, why is this bad? Let's have more conversations to get information, or why are you even hesitant about getting the vaccine to begin with?
And I want to add to that. That's a great point. I'm glad you said it in that way, because that's exactly what gets to the misinformation, Dr. Robinson. Because you had different generations having a different thought process about this
Right.
because of what they heard on media, social media, on the news. And so you had different generations that had these discussions about should you or shouldn't you, and how it's going to harm you, how it won't harm you. And a lot of that was not even being discussed. It was all of these different theories that were being thrown out there. And then the other components were we weren't able to meet if we did not have this vaccination. So my mother was impacted or by frontotemporal dementia, right? And some of the things is we did not want her exposed, but people had to provide care. So it was, can you even come in the home to see her, right? These things came to play to say, how are we going to be able to interact with each other? So once we started to filter through, even more misinformation was being brought up, which goes to what Jared was saying, which one was more effective? Which one should you take? And then we start to hear about how many more doses you need to take, and from the other 3 that were out, began more of some hesitancy, but also a more concern of when we're going to get back to quote unquote normal. So those are a lot of factors that came into play, and then having a conversation with an 18, 19, 20-year-old who have the right to make a decision whether they're going to take it or not, but they're your children. Right. And so they are like, I have a right. I'm not sure. I'm still concerned. And we're all as family saying, hey, we need this. And then they have the opinion to say why. Okay. And then on the other end, you seeing all of this filtered, unfiltered information that is going out on social media because that's where they live. And so now it's breeding in that kind of conversation of more, I'm not sure. And why do I have to, and don't force me kind of thing. So that's what we're dealing with our household at the same time.
We couldn't hear you, Dr. Robertson.
You're still on mute.
Sorry about that. I was fishing in between screens. I asked, did anyone else want to contribute more on that? don't know, but okay. So I have one of the questions was framed out from some information from Sheila Walsh, and Sheila Walsh was a televangelist. So she worked in ministry and television, and she had battled depression, severe depression, and people told her that she wasn't supposed to tell anybody about it because it would mean the end of her career and a lot of other things. And she had a history of mental illness in her family, but one day on the set, she just had it and she walked off the set. So they thought it would be the end of her career. It actually grew her career. And so she's a published author, published many bestsellers. But one of the books that she wrote, she said that sometime about her situation and making the decision to walk off stage. She said sometimes God gives you gifts that when you open them, they make your hand bleed. That when you open them, it makes your hands bleed. And so I have been referring to the pandemic, quite frankly, as a gift that was open that made my hands bleed. And we get those kind of gifts quite often, and they change our lives. And so what gifts, those kind of hand bleeding gifts, did the pandemic provide you all? I just want you to share a little bit about the things that couldn't have happened or wouldn't have happened if you had not gone through what you went through during the pandemic.
Man, what an excellent question. Whew. I'm almost scared to go first because I'll think of at least 20 other things after I speak. But when you said that, the first thing that came to mind for me was how ill-equipped the education and school systems were. And I say that was a blessing in disguise, or a blessing that made my hands bleed, because at the same time that schools and the education system overall felt like we were practicing innovation, we understood that we were immediately and terribly ill prepared for the quarantine, right? So what I want to separate is it wasn't just COVID, it was the resulting quarantine and virtual schooling that happened as a result that said, boy, we are not good at having kids be educated at home. We are not good at using technology as a tool for education. And we are not good at, quite frankly, just educating kids who are already undereducated, right? We felt like technology would be an equalizer in terms of education. We found that, boy, you know what? We were terribly wrong about that. What that meant for me was, and at the time of my organization, it really meant understanding the types of needs that kids who were already, quote unquote, behind in school needed. So as an organization, what we did was we were doing wellness checks throughout the week, all the time, calling kids and families at home. Hey, are you okay? What do you need? Because for a number of our families, what seemed like a kid was at home all day meant that there was no clear line of demarcation between school time and at home time, right? And so in so many ways, parents became uneasy partners in a kid's education, right? And students had to understand the difference between being at home and being a student, right? And that was not an easy task. So it helped us because as an organization, we were able to switch a lot of our practices to really serving our kids where they are, not just academically, but where they are in terms of their homes.
And I'll go with three things real quick, real fast. One is that we talk about community as large, is that this plague, the disease, illness, exacerbated a lot of the other issues that were already going on in the African-American Latinx community. We're talking about poverty, education, the social determinants of health, and the issues that were going on, just having a discussion of Milwaukee, Wisconsin being the most segregated state in the nation. You could see that the things that were going on, it took a toll on the community as a whole. So we talk about some of the resources. You couldn't get some places like food banks and shelters and locate things that people actually needed, couldn't use them, couldn't utilize them. And that caused it. So we were all looking at, we were being at home. What about the people who were homeless or individuals that could not get to the doctor because they actually needed a procedure or something done? So that caused a huge strain on the community itself that I still don't think is fully recovered. The other thing that I would add is these quick two things is I understood my mortality. I think that, being young, you think you're invincible. But when you got this disease touched your door, when it touched mine, and I really thought that I was going to leave, I really got an understanding of, as the men would know, I took on health I mean, like, I think I'm like extreme now about understanding my body and getting everybody on this panel to understand their body at the highest level, because my body felt like it was failing me. And it was because I wasn't taking care of myself with the other issues, underlying issues I actually had. So that was the other thing that I noticed is my mortality. The other thing is the isolation, not being forced to not be able to have interactions with your family, friends, and stuff like that. And you just on Zoom, it really took a toll on me mentally. Really had to understand what I need, and what even the smallest things is a hug and a kiss and an interaction with a loved one, and time that was missed within those 2 years that were really like taken from me. So those are things I would say, those three things for sure.
Wow, thank you for that. Anyone else?
And I would say, kind of to go along with that, Dr. Bashir, one thing that the gift that I received back was time. And for me, the reason that made my hands bleed was, again, when I was working, I spent so much time outside of the home, doing the things that I felt were important in order to provide for the home, in essence. But when the world shut down and I could no longer go those places, being at home, I was realizing how much I was missed as an individual, how much my time was missed with now only one child at home after the other two have aged out. More time with my wife, more time in prayer, more time with myself. And I'm sitting here, so to speak, looking like I've been missing out on life, so to speak. So for me, getting that time back, even though I was cut off and segregated and all those things from the things I had normally done, having that time back for me was a gift that forever has changed the way that I look at life in general. So every day for me, I live totally different because of the time that I was locked in during COVID.
Thank you for that. Excellent. Thank you for that sharing. Okay, so we know that the government had its information that was being shared. We know that health officials were sharing their information. And then, of course, there was social media that sometimes had different information that it was sharing. What one thing do you wish more government and health officials knew about your family and the sphere of influence that you inhabit? What do you wish they knew, and why?
I think I'll go there. I think the one thing, and if you sit down and talk to a government official, it may be obvious, but they still have to look at things from the perspective of bridging the gap in trust, right? Whether you're a person that believes in the science and the approach to the pandemic and vaccinations and such for maybe very science-based, we have to understand that there's still a lot of old wounds that are not healed in our community. So just being objective and aware about that dynamic is key. And then always keeping in mind that you have to take the approach from an educational perspective versus just dictating, thou shalt do this, you shall do that, right? It's the education piece that's important. So if I wouldn't have had experience in clinical trials in the past, if I didn't have a technical background and worked in the healthcare space before, maybe I would have felt differently, which would have then made it more difficult, for my family to kind of take this whole pandemic on. So as I think about it, though, more broadly, those are the things that I would highlight in terms of just being more aware of.
I wish the government and definitely the media knew, or I don't think it's that they don't know. I wish they reacted to and a clear understanding of the history of America in terms of how we frame, right, steps for vaccinations, especially in regards to race and ethnicity, right? Because when we began to talk about vaccination rates, it was as a country. And then eventually what happened was vaccination rates became those marginalized groups are not being vaccinated. We all know why African Americans have a complete mistrust of the medical field, but the vaccination rate was, where are you in terms of the white norm, right? And so the discussion became, oh, well, Black folks are not getting vaccinated, Black folks are not getting vaccinated. But when you look at historical data from pox to the flu vaccine, African Americans always hover around 30%. So actually Black folks are being normal, right? They're practicing their normal, healthy skepticism of the medical field and vaccinations. But what happened was instead, and it substantiated the American mind in Black laziness, Black inferiority, that, well, Black people don't trust, so Black people aren't acting fast enough. Black people are responsible for their own demise. And this is why, because they're not getting vaccinated. And so for me, instead of that narrative, the narrative should have been, wow, it's amazing that Black people are some of the most consistent historically when it comes to vaccination, when it comes to the medical field, the medical practices. And so I think that my hope would be that both the government, media, and medical field overall would take seriously, right, the history that African Americans have, not only in this country, but with regard to the medical field, so that we can change the narrative as a country together to say, well, actually, Black folks are doing right exactly what they've been doing. So now if we want them to be vaccinated, what do? Maybe we get more Black doctors. Maybe we think twice about how can we challenge these narratives and say, hey, you know what, y'all have an opportunity now to learn more before you get vaccinated, and not just, hey, go get vaccinated, go get vaccinated.
Sure. Thank you for that. I do appreciate you raising or elevating this idea of just a reframe, like instead of looking at it in deficit and problematizing the reasons or the vaccination rates of African American community, reframing that and recognizing that there is some resilience in that, and that there is consistency there, and that if a narrative needs to change, that something from the outside needs to impact a change on that, so that then the people are behaving differently. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else about what you wish the government or health officials knew about, your family, your life, your sphere of influence?
I can kind of jump in. And I'm really honestly just going to piggyback, especially off of, what Lynn said. And I think like there is a distrust between, community and I guess politicians, and I think it's pre-pandemic. I think the pandemic just exacerbated it a lot more, right? And I kind of connected to the work that we do in the school, right? It's like, and I can only speak for what I am dealing with in Sunnyside, and I can only speak for what I see in Texas, right? There is a clear disconnect of trust between parents and schools, especially now that the pandemic I don't even know where we are in the pandemic. I think there was always a distrust, but I think now, because parents weren't able to come into school, they weren't able to have connections with the with the teachers, they weren't able to really sit face to face. Everything was a Zoom, everything was a Google, everything was about via phone. I think that that has made things worse. And I think even when you're talking about with the community and politicians, there's clearly a disconnect. And I think it was even before the pandemic. And now I'm only connecting to you through TV. I'm only connecting through YouTube, through social media. I'm only connecting through you, through what we see on, on the screen. And there is again, I'm only speaking for what I see here. There is no politicians that made their way to communities even come out of this pandemic. There is no politicians that made their way into communities even through the pandemic, just to say, we're going to get through this, but here's some other ways to make sure that our communities are safe and are okay. There is no sense of urgency to connect from what I see, especially within the last couple of years. And I don't know, is it because, so the reason for the disconnect, I don't know, it could be maybe because of the lies that they heard, maybe because of the honesty, maybe because they think politicians steal money, which they do. Again, I can only speak for Texas, mishandling funds, but I think there's just clearly a disconnect. And I think it will continue to be there until we push people to come back into our communities, to see what's going on in our communities and to see how people live and to see what families are dealing with, and which I don't know that will happen. I think that's all the things that we want to happen. There's always, platforms like this to try to get things to happen like that, but I just don't know if that will be. And that's coming from a parent who is a police officer, who sat down with me last week. It's like there's clearly a disconnect of what, just what communities have and just politicians. So I just, like Lance said, there's a disconnect. How we move from that disconnect is the question of the hour.
And I added this to that, working for the National Institute for Health for this program called All of Us. I think when we talk about what needs to be done or more conversation is having a real education conversation about clinical trials. I think a lot of that goes right what Lynn was saying. We literally have been dealing with vaccines for how long? Measles, mumps, rubella. I remember you had to have your vaccination card to do any of that. This is not anything new about vaccination, but because this was politicized, because it was demonized on both sides, who was taking credit for what? People didn't care about it. So now it feels like it's now a soundbite. It's not in the forefront of the conversation, and people are still not even sure what the process is of actually to go through a normal clinical trial, which people are taking drugs. And this is what they would say this, as we said, many Atlanta talking about being real. You had some individuals will not take the shot, but will go and take a pill out of a gas station. Don't know what that pill is. All they knew it was going to enhance their performance sexually, off of what it read on the label. But you talk about the vaccination, I'm not taking that. That's going to do this, change my DNA and all of that. So you trust a pill that's in a dirty, nasty gas station, but you won't trust something that has been going through a process. Oh, no, I don't trust that. And then when you bring that to their mindset, they freeze because you gave them something to think about. The more discussion that we talk about is Kizzmekia Coburn. She was a scientist, Black woman that was behind that. The knowledge and the ability to understand how to be able to create a vaccine. They used her as a quick soundbite here and there, but not even understanding there are people of color that are in science and research. Right? It's not just the politicians talking about it, who's actually had to create that to make those things happen. Like we just learned, talk about who are the women that actually got to the moon. Do you see what I'm saying? There were people behind all of this that are not in the forefront. We have to hear about it in a movie or, reading a book later or stuff like that are behind making these things happen. And it takes the politicians, it takes the government, it takes people to put people out to say, hey, this is how it really supposed to work. This is how it did work. Why did it speed up? Because everyone in the world was trying to find a solution to this. It wasn't one person, it was everyone was impacted by the illness, and everyone jumped in and put all the resources behind it to get it done. But that's not what's been talked about, right? We hear the pieces of who made it fast, who did it this way, who put money behind it. And now we can go ahead and get a test right now, walk into Walgreens, grab one off the shelf, do your own swab, and be able to test it.
Right.
That's amazing, right? Those are the things that should be talked about, that now you don't have to wait to get go in a line to get yourself tested. You can at least get a first test done at home, right, immediately. And those are not discussions anymore because it's not something that they can actually score points on either side. And so that's important now. And the other thing is we are still uneducated about our own health. I don't hear people talking about their health in regards to any illness, any disease, anything that will come down that may impact you, from smallpox, from the monkeypox, you name it, chicken, all these different things. We're still not just having a discussion of what are you understanding about your health that any medication or treatment you need to know more about, period. It's not a part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I do think that as we normalize these conversations, people will get more comfortable having them, but it will take a critical mass for the experience to be normal, because quite frankly, we still aren't paying the kind of attention that needs to be paid so that we feel okay talking about health issues and talking about the impact that those health issues are going to have on us individually and us as a community. We have about 7 minutes left. And so I have one more question I want to make sure to have the entire group kind of chime in on. And then if we have any time left, we'll wrap up with a different question. The pandemic has taken a toll on communities. We know that that's true. We know that the marginalized communities have been disenfranchised even further in some respects. We know that there were some bright spots. But what are some of the emotional and mental realities you've experienced through the pandemic? What are some of the emotional and mental, psychological, tolls that the pandemic has had on you and perhaps your family by extension, or the community that you live in?
I think I'll start with that if I could. The one thing that's been significant for me is I had just come back to the area that I'm in now in a new capacity. So I'm the executive plant leader for operations here. And I just started that role. It was February of 2020, right? So, and I had familiarity with the site because I had worked there before. So I had a great relationship with everybody. Everything was cool. They were happy to see me come back. But I started back in February 2020, then 3 weeks later, essentially, the pandemic became real in the US, and I had to make and implement very tough business decisions that impacted people's lives and their work. I mean, reductions in force, reductions in operations, no real insight at the time in terms of, when things would recover. There was all types of analysis going on. Could be 2 years, could be 6 years. We have no clue in terms of the impact to our industry. And so from an emotional standpoint, it was extremely difficult to come back into an environment where, you thought things would be great. You left with a great relationship, but now I'm this person coming in that everybody once trusted, now making all these significant, site level decisions, and everyone's looking at me like, damn, Lynn, you came back just to do all this. And some people understand, right? But others are like, just like with vaccinations and other things, there's conspiracy theorists around, why we did certain things that we did, and so that has taken a toll. And to be transparent, some of these decisions, I didn't get to have a ton of input in. Right. And so it was, dictated from levels higher than me. And so, that caused some strain and stress as well. So it's been difficult to work through that. Things are returning now from a aviation industry standpoint. And so we're kind of getting back on track, but to work through that and have, the trust be strained with that particular team was an extremely difficult one for me.
I can chime in. I'll come from. Thank you, Lynn. I'll come from the work standpoint as well. The family. I'll come from the work standpoint. And the word I really want to use is just around recovery, because I just still don't think we're there. I don't think communities are there. I don't think families are there. When we first went into the pandemic in 20. Right? Was in March 20, right? And Jared kind of touched on this a little bit, just trying to figure out how in the world are we going to educate kids that ain't never been really educated on the computer before, and how we're going to do that on a full-time basis. And, just doing those checks with families, making sure everything is okay, and all of that. And so I'm going to fast forward a little bit to last year. So last year was really our first year coming out of this, right? All kids back into the building, families back into the building if possible. And last year mentally took a toll on me, not necessarily from a family standpoint. Of course, I couldn't see my mama for 2 years because she wouldn't allow me to come. And I hope she see this or hear this because I want her to feel bad. But, but I remember last year, every month last year, we're in school for 10 months from August to June. Every month last year, at least one of my students had lost a parent or a guardian, at least one. In November, we had 3 students that lost a parent or a guardian because of the effects of the pandemic. Now, they might have had other things beforehand, but the pandemic had played a role into that. At least one child every month had lost a home because their parents could no longer work or lost their job because of the pandemic. And so having to really deal with the educational side, but now you're dealing with how in the world do I support this family? And how in the world do I try to support this child who we know that education is what they need, but they're not thinking about that no more. And how do I do that? And so, you know, coming into the year last year, I thought I was ready for that until it hit. Right. Until this came and knocking like, oh, my mom, oh, my dad. And it really hit, honestly, in September when one of my female students lost her entire family, her mom, her father, her sisters, her brothers, from homicide. Right. And that was because of something, from what she was saying, because of something that had happened prior and 2 years earlier. And so the reason why I want to put the word in recovery, because I think we're going to be in recovery for a while. And last year, I had to really be able to like separate what I was doing mentally at school and not bring that mental piece school from that I was doing at school home. And it was hard. Like it was really, really, really hard. And Tamika did a really good job of really helping me separate the two. But what we were dealing with in the educational piece, like we can say that it's hard, but unless you in that field, like you do not know what people were dealing with. You don't know what families are dealing with, and they're still dealing with them, right? Now, I think this year we're better equipped to help the families. But last year we were not, and we were just hit really, really, really hard. I think my family, the emotional piece from my family standpoint, like that helped because we were good here, right? Of course, I couldn't see my mama because she wouldn't let me. I'm gonna say that again. But we were good here. And that helped me, right? But 21, 22, that year was really, really tough because the people who know me on this call, like, I love what I do and I love educating our people. And if I can't do that, like I have a problem. And I don't feel like I was able to do that just because of where we were. And just because of where we were in the community, just because of where we were just in the world. Like how I just lost my mom and my dad. How y'all want me? I'm not finna add nothing. I'm not finna write nothing. I'm not finna read this, right? We just lost our house because my mom couldn't work and lost her job. Why y'all want me to read this? And those are real answers, right? Those are real answers. Now, I ain't just make that up. Y'all want me to come to school? I'm not, I just got arrested yesterday. I'm not doing that. And so last year was tough mentally. I think we're in a better spot this year, but education was in a bad spot last year. Bad spot. So I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate that, William. So I want to just be mindful that we said we were going to spend about an hour. I have one other question that that you really touched on. And if you all have just a couple more minutes, I wanted to ask one more question. Does everybody kind of give me a thumbs up and I'll do that? Okay, perfect. How many of you have lost someone due to the pandemic or extenuating circumstances related to COVID infection or something like that. Because in my particular line of work, it's been amazing to me how many folks who live different than me and have different backgrounds than I do actually have been spared that reality. And so I want to hear just on this call how many folks have had someone close to them die from COVID or COVID related complications.
I had an aunt pass away, and there was actually two in consecutive years, 2020 and 2021. And at the time, it was really, I think the subsequent decisions were around how many people could be at a funeral home, and all these sorts of things that made those connections really difficult. And so I lost two paternal aunts in consecutive years.
Thank you.
And I too, I lost an aunt as well. And it was early on before they even kind of knew what COVID was. And then once COVID came out and they looked back and things of that nature, I think more so than that, I have an uncle that had COVID in December of 19 as we were rolling into it. And even to this day, because there was not information, there was not treatment out, he suffers, horrendously from different things where they went down his throat to get him to breathe and being on the respirator and things like that. And I think I hear a lot more stories of people that are still suffering from the pandemic and suffering from the virus, even more so than the stories about death than I used to hear.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you bringing that to the fore, and also the whole idea of long COVID. And so, yes,
Right.
thank you so much. I appreciate that. Others, how many of you all have extenuating health circumstances, or you have someone that's in them, or someone died from COVID and that kind of thing, just life-changing stuff? How many of you all had some people's lives inexorably changed because of the COVID pandemic?
My dad's best friend, I knew him not a lot, but I did know him, died, and it really impacted my dad heavily emotionally, knowing that how he was found in his home. It looks like he was trying to get off the couch, and they actually didn't, he did not hear from him for about 3 weeks, and then they got into his home, and he was dead in his home. So that was pretty hard. And then just physically myself, I had that spotted pneumonia. I still feel residual pain and that as well from it. The fatigue was still there for a while, and then the fog was still there at some point. But I really can't tell you because there's some certain tests that they're looking to do and studies they're looking to do to continue on to try to figure out what have you, any type of extending issues that you may have. But I'm not sure, right? That's the other thing. We're not really sure what the full effects would be. We won't know that for some time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Others?
True. Now, go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks. And I was just going to say I'm probably a little bit of an outlier in this population. In terms of family, no one passed away as a result of it. Multiple family members have had it and seemingly have fully recovered. So it would seem that, at least my experience that way has been a little different from what I'm hearing from the rest of the panel. So just wanted to chime in there.
Thank you. Dario?
Sure. Now, I was just going to touch on also, we speak of long COVID. When we speak of kind of the younger generation, I think their idea of long COVID is going to be one of more emotional things they missed. Like I think of my youngest, she graduated 8th grade. There was no ceremony, no walk. My daughter graduated college during COVID. There was no ceremony. There was no stage walk. So I remember the first homecoming after COVID when they could attend in person. I'm the homecoming father, so I'm driving all these girls, we're taking photographs and just hearing them speak about, their COVID experiences and, not being able to do this and missing this. I think sometimes looking at the long-term effects of that on that particular generation, could be something that could come back around and end up being harmful. I just wonder what those effects could be long-term as well.
Sure. That's really a great point about, and then those years that were lost in the classroom.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely. William, did you want to talk about anyone you?
We've been actually blessed. My family's been blessed. I haven't lost anyone because of COVID. So
Okay, thank you for that.
thankful for that. Yeah.
Jared? Did he?
No, I just mentioned my two aunts, and then also just I think for my son who graduated virtually. Let's call them that, virtual graduations.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. I think I pulled the short straw because I've actually had several very close friends whose parents died. And so I had three besties whose mother died. One mother actually had not been out of the house the entire pandemic, and their family was vigilant about cleaning, and they went to mail order and just did everything they could. And then they had a traveling nurse that came in and brought COVID into the family, and the mother died. And so I've heard 2 or 3 little stories similar to that. And then I have a niece, a 35-year-old former athlete, fantastic, a mom with 3 children. And she was 35 and excellent health, got COVID, and she is on high blood pressure medicine and will be on the rest of her life. And she had no health issues or anything before that. So it inexorably changed her life. And so she actually is on, she is partially disabled, and so she can only work 20 hours a week. So she's 32. And so I have just a number of different kind of stories and scenarios. And it's, again, been very interesting that my white counterparts, they don't have similar stories like that in terms of the death toll and then the exacerbating issues or the long COVID. And I just kind of gave you a little snippet of it. But we will continue to just have conversations like this. We will continue to unveil the realities of the health disparities that are true and that are present, and what needs to happen for African Americans to gain some level of trust of the establishment, and what needs to look different for there to be parity and health equity in our population. And so I am so grateful. The time flies when you're having fun. And so we're out of time right now, but this was a splendid conversation, and I look forward to many more conversations with you all. Just want to thank you for your time and thank you for your contribution to this effort. And I will make sure that you all have a copy of the recording as soon as it's available. The intention is in probably 2 to 3 weeks for us to host a day where the actual suite of conversations are hosted. So we'll do a mini conference, and we will probably have, because it's 4 different people groups. We have female African American supportive service providers. We have this group of African American men. We have a Latinx group, and then we will likely have a millennial panel. And then that's what we'll do, is we will host a mini conference and make people aware of the links and that kind of thing. And then they will just be played so that the viewing community or the listening community can have some access to the content that was presented and corralled in these conversations. And so thank you all again so much. Happy Sunday. I'm so grateful that you all chose to give me just a little bit of your time. And I didn't ever think I would be one of those that says it, but go Pack, go. We got about 10 minutes before we start the football game. And
Yes, in a few minutes.
just a few minutes.
Robinson, for having these platforms for us to be able to speak. And I also want to thank you, brothers, to be able to take this time to speak, because they definitely need to see us and see our faces. So I wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Appreciate you all. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You have my contact information, and should you need any information or need any thing that I can support you with, please be in touch. I sure appreciate it again. All righty.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.